Happy evening, everybody. I'm Keerthi here, a sub scholar pursuing my doctoral degree in Karpagam, Academy of Higher Education, Coimbatore, Tamil Nadu. It's my great privilege to anchor the third session of today's program, and I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Once again, I welcome you all. This session, Ecology and Science, is chaired by Dr. Anjali Naik, who is head of the Department of Botany in Saraswati Bhuvan College, Aurangabad. And she has a teaching experience of 25 years and had published nearly 18 research papers on national and international journals. Her special interests are translating scientific articles for non-science background holders. I welcome you, ma'am. There are 4 presenters in this session. The first one to present is Priyadarshini. She is an PhD scholar pursuing a doctoral degree in Sri Sharda College for Women, Salem, Tamil Nadu, and her paper titled Frankenstein, a cornucopia in Paulo Bagulapi's The Wind-Up Girl. Swati Sharma is next to present, and she is an assistant professor in the Department of English, Satyavati College, University of Delhi, and her paper titled Dystopian Awakening, Ecocritical Rumination on Climate Change in Narlikar's Ice Age Count. The third one to present is Dr. Sindhu. She is an associate professor in the Department of English, Bengaluru University, Bengaluru, and she has published a book on the Central Asian oral epic titled The Mano Epos Across the Millennium in 2005, and she has completed a minor research project titled Siberia and the Literary Imagination from Frozen Waste to the Land of Future in 2013, and it was funded by the Bengaluru University. And a fourth one to present is Dr. Shantala and her paper titled Abnormal Beings in the Hindu Mythology and Possible and Medical Explanations. Dr. Shantala is an gynecologist and obstetrician from Bengaluru. She is one of the alumni of Bangalore Medical College and Ladyhood College, New Delhi. She is a bilingual writer and she has written fiction and non-fiction and academic topics in both Kannada and English. Her works include When the Going to Tough, The Doppler Effect, Ibanya Daringalu, Devaragalu Moregenu, and she is about to release her next science fiction novel. And I thank you all. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. At the outset, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present my PPT. Abnormal beings in Hindu mythology and possible medical explanation. Why do these mythological beings fascinate me? I think it's very exciting to compare and contrast ancient and current medical knowledge. Myth or truth actually doesn't matter. The fact that someone even thought about it is interesting enough for me to delve into this topic. I've been trying to explore if current medical technology can explain them. So I have realized that various conditions fall along one of these categories like possible, plausible, believable, explainable, unexplainable, and finally impossible. Now, starting with how an abnormal being can occur. It can be either natural or artificial. Naturally, of course, there are birth defects which are not serious enough to kill, which is possible. And the interspecies, intergenus, interorder breeding, which is unexplainable. And chimeras, as I'll show you in the later slides, is a plausible abnormal being but with a wide stretch of imagination. Artificially occurring abnormal beings can occur because of gene manipulation and editing, creating clones and chimeras. and the perfect human beings called the designers, and finally with the ingestion of medication or magic potions. However, the first and second mandate the use of advanced artificial reproductive techniques. The abnormalities occurring naturally, sage Ashtavakra, who is been shown in the picture, was supposed to have 8 deformities, possibly arthrogryphosis multiplexa congenita, what we say in current medical terminology. So this is a possibility, it could have happened. Aruna, the charioteer of the sun, was not having any organs down from the waist, and it's quite possible. But however, he still bore 2 sons. This is plausible because he might have adopted assisted reproduction techniques. Whereas the four-handed gods, the three-headed or the four-headed gods are unexplainable with the current medical technology. The naturally occurring abnormalities, which are almost impossible. First one is Rishyashringa, who is shown in the picture, who was born with the horn of a deer. We'll come to Rishyashringa in the later slides also. The interclass reproduction, where the human beings are bearing reptilian or avian offsprings. Kadru was the mother of snakes, and Vinita was the mother of Garuda and Aruna. Interestingly, both of them were sisters and they were married to the same person, that is Kashyapa. So this Kashyapa also happens to be their father's brother. So there is this consanguinity. So the abnormality can be because of consanguinity or because of abnormal female genetics of the sisters. Now coming to the abnormal organisms that are formed not normally. The chimeras. The chimera is an organism that is composed of cells of more than one genotype. They are genetically edited. It is plausible, but with extremely advanced technology. So we have a variety of chimeras in Hindu mythology. Varahaswami, who is a boar and man with 4 arms, Narasimha, man and lion, Shukamuni, who is parrot and human, Hayagriva, a horse head on a human body, Kamadhenu, and a woman and cow. But the most fascinating chimera, I think, is Makaradhwaja. He is a combination of human, monkey, reptile, and fish, and that is what is indicated in this picture here. And incidentally, he also happens to be the son of Hanuman. The other abnormal organism is a clone. A clone is an exact copy of the original individual. And cloning is done from any somatic cell of the body, and there is no need for gametes at all. In 1996, Dolly was the first sheep that was cloned from the mammary gland of an ewe. So invariably, because it is a double of the parent, the clones are of the same sex as the parent. And human cloning is banned due to obvious reasons, but I think it is possible to clone a human being. So the technology, yes, what was there probably before is there, can be used now also, though it is banned. Now the clones whom we can explain. The famous Raktabijasura. It is said that one similar Raktabijasura erupted from every blood cell that fell on the ground. So this is a clone from the blood cell which is positive, which is possible. The father of all clones, I think, is Brahma, because he had clones coming out of his eyes, forehead, skin, face, heart, navel, lower lip, etc. So it's quite possible a person having many clones from many somatic cells of the organs. But what is not explainable, cloning that cannot be explained, are these. Makaradhwaja, as I told you, is an interclass chimera supposed to be the son of Hanuman, born from his sweat skin cells. So he should have been another Hanuman, but instead he had human, fish, reptilian, and monkey characteristics. Shukamuni, who was born of Vedavyasa, he is human and avian, also depicted in this picture. And clone of opposite sex. I told you that cloning is always the offspring is of the same sex. But here we have Shatarupa, who is a female born from Brahma, male, and of course our own Ganesha, who was born from the skin cells of Parvati. So in this picture, I have depicted the clones who remain unexplainable with current medical technology. Then, of course, the designers are made to order people, and it's quite plausible. Their person is made to order by editing the gene, and it is even indicated in our Puranas that Vishwakarma, the divine architect, created Tilottama. Similarly, the most beautiful celestial beings might be created, like the Apsaras, Agandharvas, etc. They all may be created. It's quite plausible. Now, a word about in vitro fertilization. Here you see an egg which is being fertilized by the sperm, and this is all done outside the human body, and therefore it's an advanced technique of assisted reproduction. And the embryo that is formed is kept outside the body for 3 to 5 days before it is implanted into the uterus, or it may be frozen for future use. But unlike the common name that is used for IVF, that is test tube baby, babies cannot be grown in the test tube or even in a petri dish with the current medical technology. So there is no technique to grow a baby outside the uterus. However, in our previous mythologies, in our previous stories, there are instances of IVF, and I think they are possibly impossible IVFs in current medical terms, because they have extremely advanced techniques where the babies were grown outside the body. Examples include Agastya and Vashishta, who are supposed to be coming out of a Kumbha Yoni, or twins born of Varuna and Mitra, with Urvashi born in a pot. And here in the picture you can see Gandhari, mother of 101 children, where it is said that a large piece of flesh was cut into 101 pieces and grown into human babies. This is very unique because it sets us thinking whether the Kauravas, 101 Kauravas, were also clones. And if so, there was one woman out of them. So, how is it possible? And finally, to get such a stupendous success rate for IVF is unheard of in current medical technology. And intrauterine insemination is another assisted reproductive technique where we place the processed semen into the uterus. Birth of Rama and his brothers after Putrakameshti Yagna. There is the history, so story of ingestion of magic potion by the queens. Was it IUI actually? And of course, there is prenatal sex selection because Putrakameshti Yaga was done for selecting male babies. Similarly, the Pandavas, as they had a different father, maybe they were born of intrauterine insemination, donor semen. But however, insemination between human to animals, as in case of Rishyashringa, who is a cross between human and deer, is impossible with current medical technologies. And interestingly, these are cyber organisms who are connected to the World Wide Web, and they can be omniscient and omnipresent. Krishna is our super cyborg, and Sanjaya is the charioteer who could see the battlefield sitting in the palace. So these are cyber organisms who could connect to the happenings of the world everywhere. And finally, one word about interesting medical conditions. A male bearing a baby, we have accounts of King Yuvanashva getting pregnant and giving birth to a baby, which is not possible with current known medical technology. And sex change operations. Yes, sex change operations are being done currently, but here we have instances of sex changing with reversal. Ela was a person who changed from man and woman, and similarly we have Lord Vishnu who changes from man to Mohini, the woman, and back. Prolonging longevity and reversing death is impossible currently, but however, we have accounts of Savitri, Satyavan, Markandeya, Lakshmana ingesting the Sanjeevani, and Rohita, the son of Harishchandra, who all got back to life. Rejuvenation, progeria with reversal, that has happened with Puru and Yayati. It is plausible, maybe with advanced medical technology. So, with this, I come to the end of my talk. Thank you very much. And
The title of my paper is Bangalore's Urban Ecology Crisis, Science Fiction to the Rescue. My paper attempts to examine Amu Joseph's short essay. It's a short piece of speculative fiction on Bangalore. It is called Back to the Future. The problematic terrain of Bangalore's urban ecology ranges across the following issues: a steadily deteriorating climate, crumbling and vastly inadequate urban infrastructure, illegal land acquisition and use, poor public transport facilities, lack of civic amenities, increasing crime levels, particularly against women and children, the artificial creation of urban slums, corrupt and inefficient governance, citizen apathy, destruction of green spaces and cover, population pressure, traffic congestion, dangerous levels of air, water, soil, and noise pollution, urban poverty, and visions of future growth distorted by political greed for power and capital gains. In invoking past images of Bangalore from the 1980s and the 1990s, Amu Joseph's writing is not merely nostalgic indulgence, but an incisive analysis of the reasons for the civic ecological conditions that present-day Bangalore suffers from. These older images of the city are juxtaposed with its 21st century realities to highlight the city's most glaring problems. The juxtaposition itself is significantly framed within a complex dream fantasy, in which a genie of supernatural powers grants her the proverbial 3 wishes to fulfill her desire for an ideal city space. Inadequate infrastructure, misconceived architecture, and a degraded environment are the 3 most prominent urban issues identified by Joseph in her analysis. Easing of traffic congestion, redesigning the architectural cityscape, and restoration of the city's ecology in terms of water bodies and greenery are her 3 wishes. But even within this fantasy framework, Joseph's genie is out for a nap and is clearly not up to the task. Humor apart, the genie's absence can be construed as a clear-eyed recognition that A. Supernatural forces may have to be construed to address the scale and depth of the urban problems in Bangalore. B. Fantasy alone will not be sufficient to tackle the matter. Joseph's writing straddles both the worlds of science fiction, in which an alternative world is scientifically created and sustained, and that of science fantasy, in which there is a deliberate violation of scientific fact in order to create fresh possibilities. Both science fiction and science fantasy have played important roles within the field of urban studies, primarily in the creation of alternative possibilities, in relation to existing urban problems, as well as in envisioning new directions of growth and development. These alternatives have often been in the form of imaginary utopias, in which every conceivable ideal of urban existence can be achieved. Paul Graham Raven identifies 3 kinds of utopia in urbanism: the classical, the technological, and the critical. The third category, the critical utopia, in which self-reflexivity in terms of both the creation of a fantastic ideal as well as its sustainability, plays a key role and is the most relevant for our purposes of analysis here. In situating herself as a tax-paying resident in a specific urban locality of Bangalore, Amu Joseph draws a meeting point between the imaginary and the actual, in what Lawrence Davis refers to as the grounded utopian imagination. Davis suggests that the tensions between democratic politics and green imperatives can be usefully addressed through what he calls ecotopia, or the imaginary creation of an ecologically ideal utopia which would be inclusive in ways that would minimize conflict in specific contexts. In the fantastic Bangalore of Joseph's dream imagination, some of the most pressing everyday ecological and civic problems faced by citizens are taken up and dealt with. Public transport, which had always been undependable in Bangalore, has become woefully inadequate in the last 3 decades of so called growth and development. The working populations of the megacity of each economic segment have in recent years faced appalling challenges in terms of traffic jams, pollution, road accidents, poor connectivity, and collapsed infrastructure in a permanent state of disrepair. The consequences of unplanned development in response to the burgeoning population have also meant that civic and urban facilities like shopping centers, schools, hospitals, offices, and parks have become impossibly difficult of access via public transport, throwing commuters into a vicious cycle of dependence on private vehicle use. Garbage clearance is another sore point in the daily life of the average resident in the city, caught as she is between the garbage mafia, who are often themselves the local municipal authorities, and the actual problem of hygienic disposal. This issue overlaps with that of illegal land use and occupation, which is a widespread problem within city limits, as well as on its growing peripheries. In Joseph's fantasy, all these are scientifically and holistically solved. Public roads are well maintained, enabling pedestrians of every age, gender, socioeconomic stratum to walk safely. Commuters are supported by a well-planned suburban train metro public transport system. Garbage is not only segregated prior to collection but processed hygienically to feed a local fertilizer industry, which in turn supplies residential gardens while providing a livelihood to unemployed youth. Green lung spaces are plentiful and well maintained and easily accessed, as are community centers, shops, schools, and other urban facilities. The most appealing aspects of Joseph's fantasy are its inclusivity and its organic interlinking of related socio-economic factors in the resolution of Bangalore's urban challenges. Joseph envisages a perfect cooperative alliance amongst the planning authority and administrative government bodies, private players, multinational corporations, and local citizen participation in the imaginary construction of a completely revitalized, new, and scientifically admissible city. In both her nostalgic recollection of Bangalore's ecological past, as well as in her projected fantasy of the transformed new city, Joseph construes the resources of ecology and environment as an integral part of public health, collective ownership, and responsibility. This perspective ties in with the larger notions of the planet's natural resources needing common preservation and sharing, a view increasingly adopted by ecologists the world over. In this sense, her scientific fantasy reveals how changes at the grassroots level can be a realistic microcosmic reflection of a transformed ecologically healthy world. In Joseph's envisaged new city plan of Bangalore, the conventional divide between the rural and the urban is done away with, possibly for two reasons. One, to consciously reject any hierarchical differences that are commonly constructed between the urban and the rural. Two, to recognize that Bangalore's identity as a global megacity rests partly on its inept appropriation of one's rural peripheral spaces in its career of heady, unplanned urbanization, especially in the last 3 decades. The dream image of a Bangalore reordered to be an ecologically viable and sustainable urban space, configured by Joseph, can therefore hardly be viewed merely as part of the classical utopian paradigm, in its supposedly apolitical, escapist, and compensatory implications. A more constructive view would be to understand this fantasy as a critical utopia coming within the realm of scientific possibility, if not probability, while it simultaneously raises crucial questions about who and what constitute urban space in today's times. In his essay, Whose Rights to What City? Exploring the question of urban rights, Peter Marcuse draws from the work of Lefebvre, David Harvey, and Herbert Marcuse, and makes a distinction between those who are deprived and those who are discontent in relation to their positioning within their given urban space. The inclusivity of Joseph's vision takes both these strands into consideration and recognizes their transformative potential in the creation of a new urban space. In general terms, Marcuse identifies citizen rights in the urban context as pertaining to clean water, clean air, housing, decent sanitation, mobility, education, healthcare, and to democratic participation in decision making. In analyzing the Lefebvrean conceptualization of the city as urban space, Marcuse further identifies the notions of justice, equity, democracy, beauty, accessibility, community, public space, environmental quality, support for the full development of human potentials to all according to their needs, the recognition of human differences, sustainability, and diversity as making up the texture of the urban. Amo Joseph's scientific projection brings a local specificity to all these elements, while not losing sight of the fact that conventional definitions of the city, in terms of size, heterogeneity, and density, still apply in great part to Bangalore's realities, and that many of its present day problems stem from this. Amo Joseph's scientifically transformed Bangalore conforms to the Lefebvrean and Marcusean constructs of the urban in its envisaged shift from an overwhelming emphasis on consumption as a marker of urban rights to a self reflexive reordering which democratically decides what is produced, how it is produced, the right to determine these, as well as the right to participate in production. Through the device of scientific fantasy, Amo Joseph's reordered Bangalore presents an alternative which is almost the antithesis of the city's present day severely contested urban space. Joseph's work illustrates the observations of Kaufman and Lebas on urban utopia. I quote, "Utopia, as the search for a place that does not yet exist, plays a major role in Lefebvre's conception of the right to the city, which emerged from a consideration of the possible impossible." Unquote. Both refer to urban feminist Ruth Levitas in arguing, I quote, "for the necessity of utopia because of its potential for social transformation, a really possible world whose emergence from the present state of affairs is credible. It can be defined as the desire for a better way of living expressed in the description of a different kind of society that makes possible that alternative way of life." Unquote. The urban ideal that Joseph imagines tallies with the Lefebvrean thought that it is not the right to the existing city that is demanded, but the right to a future city. Joseph's new Bangalore stems from, rather than shying away from, the fact that the actual urban space is constantly contested and, in the Lefebvrean sense, recorded, produced by different forces ranging from the topmost corridors of power to the most disenfranchised segments of population within Bangalore. In viewing the urban as a constant reinvention, viewing the contemporary urban crisis as an opportunity to imagine alternatives and to create new possible urban worlds, Amo Joseph's scientifically reordered urban space raises questions, as it should, about the imbalances, inequalities, and injustices that form the texture of the actual city space. Thank you.
Greetings to everyone. Let me commence by expressing my gratitude towards the organizing committee of this international conference for giving me an opportunity to present my research paper. As you can see, my presentation is entitled Dystopian Awakening, Ecocritical Rumination on Climate Change in Narlikar's Ice Age Comic. The presentation will primarily scrutinize the positioning of existential anxiety in science fiction. In addition, it shall attempt to analyze fictional Dr. Chitnis's apprehensions on equilibrium disruption in the light of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's warnings. Ethnomethodological approach and close textual analysis will be employed to discern the criticism of over-industrialization in the aforementioned short story by Narlikar. Now, I implore the audience to kindly pay attention to the following headlines of leading newspapers or websites cautioning against global warming. They are the Dr. Chitnis of our times. Then, this graph depicting rising sea levels. And finally, these frightening images. The central question is, What exactly is climate change? According to Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the term climate change itself refers to a change in the state of climate that can be identified by changes in the mean or the variability of its properties and that persists for an extended period, typically decades or longer. It refers to any change in climate over time, whether due to natural variability or as a result of human activity. This definition is in contrast with United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change (UNFCCC), where climate change refers to the change of climate that is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity. One must ponder the relationship between climate change and fiction. Jessica Hawkes, in her thesis submitted to the University of Waterloo, raised some pertinent questions in this regard. Can literature fill the gap between the popular and the political narratives about climate change, opening a space for the average person to reflect on these issues? Writing about the role of nuclear fiction in the 1950s, Peter Schwenger writes that fiction, quote, did not dictate a response to the threat so much as make response possible, unquote. Can literature play a similar role in this regard to climate change? If the challenge of the climate crisis is to imagine other forms of human existence, can literature help in this regard by allowing readers to approach the world in a subjunctive mode and thus make possible the imagining of possibilities? Unquote. I strongly believe that science fiction has bridged this gap and cemented the lacune. Science fiction is characterized by the pervasiveness of cognitive estrangement. According to Darko Suvin, a science fiction story or a novel encompasses novum, a device whose presence compels us to imagine a different way of perceiving our world. According to Darko Suvin's Metamorphosis of Science Fiction on the Poetics and History of Literary Genre, science fiction does not, quote, posit another superordinate reality, but an alternative on the same ontological level as the author's empirical reality, an alternate reality which overtly or tacitly presupposes the existence of author's empirical reality, since it can be gauged and understood only as the empirical reality modified in such and such ways, unquote. This ontological question forms the premise of Jayant Narlikar's Ice Age Cometh. Jayant Vishnu Narlikar's Uber integrates the function of cosmic epoch and quantum theorization with totalitarian or post-apocalyptic Weltanschauung. His Ice Age Cometh is a fantastic cautionary tale narrating a radical departure from the world of complacent experience. His ominous viewpoint of our contemporary order vis-a-vis environmental degradation has been projected into a disastrous prognostication about the future. Therefore, it is imperative to examine the anticipated ramification of climate change from an ecocentric standpoint. But before I venture into the ecocritical concerns, let me establish the link between sci-fi and dystopia, of which Ice Age Cometh is a brilliant example. The word dystopia is the commonly used antonym of utopia and denotes that class of hypothetical societies containing images of worlds worse than our own. An early user of the term was John Stuart Mill in a parliamentary speech in 1868, but its recent fashionableness probably stems from its use in Quest for Utopia by Glenn Negley and J. Max Patrick. Dystopian images are almost invariably images of future society, pointing fearfully at the way the world is supposedly going in order to provide urgent propaganda for a change in direction. As hope for a better future grows, the fear of disappointment inevitably goes with it, and when any vision of a future utopia incorporates a manifesto for political or action or belief, opponents of that action or belief will inevitably attempt to show that its consequences are not utopian but horrible. For all these careful qualifications and amendments, it remains true that much of science fiction, and often the most interesting examples, both in literature and cinema, is indeed dystopian. Coming back to the story, the protagonist Rajiv Shah is a victim of future shock. Alvin Toffler in Future Shock noted that the survivors of future shock are often characterized by, and I quote, obsessive reversion to previously successful adaptive routines that are now irrelevant and inappropriate. The reversionist sticks to his previously programmed decisions and habits with dogmatic desperation. The more change threatens from without, the more meticulously he repeats past modes of action. His social outlook is regressive. Shocked by the arrival of the future, he offers hysterical support for the not so status quo, or he demands, in one masked form or another, a return to the glories of yesteryear. This is the chief trait of the protagonist of Narlikar's story. Having experienced the extreme, he is reminded of Dr. Vasant Chitnis's ultimatums. The diamond dust phenomena, as explained by Dr. Chitnis, has left the world spiraling into the potential ice age. Dr. Chitnis himself regretfully informed Rajiv Shah, the protagonist, that, I quote, there was still a number of established scientists who did not agree that this was the onset of an ice age. They attributed this to the transient perturbation in the climate, no doubt larger in magnitude than usual, but transient nevertheless. They promised that good old warm days would return within a few years once the balance was restored to the process of heating and cooling of oceans and the air above. Unquote. While one does appreciate the efforts of scientists, a similar debate has ensued in relation with COVID-19 pandemic among the experts. This unpredictability caused by the dismantling of equilibrium in nature has given rise to eco-critical concerns. Eco-criticism is the study of literature and the environment from an interdisciplinary point of view, where literature scholars analyze texts that illustrate environmental concerns and examine the various ways in which literature treats the subject of nature. It takes an interdisciplinary point of view by analyzing the works of authors, researchers, and poets in the context of environmental issues and nature. Some eco-critics brainstorm possible solutions for the correction of contemporary environmental situation. There are several assertions that I have deliberated on to study the symbiotic relationship between dystopic literature and eco-criticism. Among the most distinguished is Wrigley's assertion that, quote, nature is only thematic when it becomes a problem. Unquote. Another is Buell's claim that science fiction is the best genre for thinking about the planet and the environment. Both are established and renowned eco-critics. Then there is Ursula K. Heiss, who has observed that eco-criticism has a quote-unquote triple allegiance to quote the scientific study of nature, the scholarly analysis of cultural representations, and the political struggle for more sustainable ways of inhabiting the natural world, unquote. Although these are broad criteria comprising fields of study in their own rights, when combined in an eco-critical literary analysis, they foster insights about humanity's relationship to the natural world. The origin and impact of anthropogenic climate change on the environment as well as on human populations can be best summed up in Narlikar's fictional character Dr. Chitnis's words, and I quote, man may claim to be the master of earth, but the best of his technology is no match to the scale on which nature can operate, unquote. Although literary criticism often employs ecology, quote unquote, by means of mere metaphor, and relies on outdated and idealistic ideas of ecology, we cannot discount the value of eco-critical approach, nor can we ignore how ecology is understood and employed by authors and literary critics alike. Nature and culture, despite their long-standing division between the two, are not mutually exclusive. Rather, as Newman has argued, and many dystopian novels have also demonstrated, they are interdependent and affect one another in a feedback loop-like mechanism. Both nature writing and dystopian literature offer readers a way of understanding the world. The genres are more than the collection of formal features, but they are also acting as the epistemological tools, the ways of knowing and seeing the represented worlds. Like eco criticism, dystopian literature involves political and ideological dimensions. It critiques existing social conditions or political systems. While it is impossible to deny how the environment is inherently impacted by the social and political systems, I would argue that environmental degradation can become dystopian in itself. This is reflected by many dystopian critical analysis of environmental degradation. Thank you.
Good morning, Anand. I'm Priyadashini, PhD, Research Scholar in Sri Sharada College, Puducherry, Salem. Title of my paper is Frankenfoot, a cornucopia in Paleo-Basigalupis, the wind-up girl. The paper mainly focuses on the ramification of genetically modified food, which is depicted in the dystopian science fiction The Wind-Up Girl, and bolster theory of agricultural intensification as an advocacy for future food production. Paolo Bacigalupi is an American science fiction writer and fantasy writer. His genre include science fiction, adult fiction, biopunk. His remarkable works include The Water Knife, The Shipbreaker, The Drowned Cities, The Dowd Factory, The Wind-Up Girl, and so on. He received enormous prestigious awards, out of which Nebula Award for Best Novel, Compton Crook Award, Hugo Award for Best Novel, the Reading List Award for Science Fiction, John W. Campbell Memorial Award are won by Paolo Bacigalupi in the year 2010 for his biopunk novel The Wind-Up Girl. Paolo Bacigalupi's The Wind-Up Girl is a dystopian science fiction published in the year 2009. The plot revolves around Thailand's 23rd century's post-food crisis, where global warming has boosted sea levels and fossil fuel supplies have been exhausted. Due to overreaching population, the world is running out of natural resources, including food. In the novel, biotechnological innovation takes an initiative in solving food crisis with genetically modified organisms. Even the extinct species is brought back to existence by this technology. Genetically modified organism is a process by which DNA or other nucleic acid molecules are artificially manipulated, modified, and recombined in order to alter an individual or a population of organisms. Cornucopia is a Greek mythological term, refers to a horn of plenty, symbolizes abundance and nourishment. Like cornucopia, the science fiction is filled with genetically modified fruits, vegetables, animals, and even human beings. Genetically modified organisms are also called franken food. We find lingua fruit, which is shown in the figure, is similar to that of mangostan. Nightshade vegetables, you take noodles, they or rice, are considered as franken food in the novel. Biotechnology is regulated by multinational megacorporations, which are said to be calorie companies that regulate food production by seeds. Agribiotech firms are Agrigen, Soypro, Utex, Hydro, or identical to the present-day big firms such as Monsanto, Bayer, Syngenta, DuPont, etc. Multinational biotech corporates such as Agrigen, Presta, Purecall, or parasitic companies that have fostered corruption and political turmoil through their disease-inducing and sterilizing genetic manipulation. These corporates allow bioterrorism and economic gangsters to secure markets for their goods, just as Monsanto is currently doing. Plagues that are both intentional and unintentional mutations have wiped out the natural heirloom seeds and virtually replaced genetically modified sterile plants and mutate pests such as gene hack weevil. Foodborne disease such as Sebaceous, blister rust, gene hack weevil, scabrous mole, leaf curl, yellow plague, mutate spreads all over the world. Thailand has escaped economic subjugation by international calorie companies by some naive practices of hiding seed banks of various natural seeds and has been targeted by agri corporations. Both the Ministry of Trade and Ministry of Environment are set up to monitor the reuse of GMO crops, which was banned earlier. Finally, heirloom seeds are preserved by the Environmental Ministry from the Hippocratic Trade Ministry. Socio-economic, political, and environmental issues are focused in the novel. The novel ends with a note that advanced gene editing technology may be a threat to humanity. The Reverend Thomas Robert Malthus is an English economist and demographer. He is well known for his work, an essay on the principle of population published in the year 1798. According to him, when population increases, natural resource gets depleted. The population will face disequilibrium in food production. Esther Bostrup is a cornucopian Danish agricultural economist. Her seminal works are The Conditions of Agricultural Growth that suggest all types of primitive agriculture. Population and Technological Change, a study of long-term trends, deals with population growth. Malthus versus Bostrup. According to Malthusian catastrophe, it occurs according to Malthus, Malthusian catastrophe occurs when population growth outpaces agricultural production, population to be limited by famine or war. Population growth will always tend to outrun the food supply, and that betterment of humankind is impossible without stern limits on reproduction. In contrast to Malthus, Bosley emphasized the positive aspects of large population. Bostrup suggested that more population there are, the more hands there are to work. She argued that as population increases, more pressure is placed on the existing agricultural system, which stimulates invention. The changes in technology allows for improved crop strains and increased yields. The issues of population density and fruit production in the dystopian novel The Wind-Up Girl is analyzed through the lens of Bostrupian theory. Bostrup theory can be applied for both the present and the future for food production. In The Wind-Up Girl, as suggested by Bostrup, out of population pressure and necessity, they invented gene editing technology for food production. Such gene editing technology leads to detrimental foodborne diseases. Bostrup suggests primitive agriculture. Primitive agriculture can be implemented to mitigate such foodborne diseases, which is depicted in the novel. Non-GMOs like Vandana Shiva, Rachel Parent suggest millet plantation. According to the USA Department of Agriculture, defines precision agriculture as a management system that is information and technology based and is site specific and uses one or more of the following sources of data: soils, crops, nutrients, pests, moisture, or yield for optimum profitability, sustainability, and protection of the environment. So the US Department of Agriculture is suggesting precision agriculture for food production. Therefore, natural or traditional farming method and technology like agriculture should be followed instead of advanced gene editing technology to attain sustainable agriculture. Thank you, everyone.
A very good morning to all the viewers of this session. At the outset, I thank the organizers of this conference in the capacity of chairperson for giving me the opportunity to review and summarize the presentations in the session devoted to ecology and science fiction. In all, 4 papers were presented in this session. The first paper that I would be reviewing is by Dr. J. Sindhu from Bangalore University, Bangalore. The title of this paper is Bangalore's Urban Ecology Crisis, Science Fiction to the Rescue. It starts with a question mark. We are all aware of the adverse impacts of ill-planned or unplanned urban developments on the ecology of any city. In this paper, Dr. J. Sindhu has reviewed or taken help of the novel written by Amu Joseph titled Back to the Future. In this report, Amu Joseph has analyzed the peaceful and clean past state of the Bangalore and present day chaotic, polluted and a kind of collapsed state of the same due to industrialization and urbanization. The conversion of Bangalore city into IT and software hub has led it to face many problems like traffic congestion, loss of its green cover, collapse of urban infrastructure and pollutions of all sorts. Amu Joseph has presented a solution to the restoration of the past glory and clean, peaceful state of Bangalore with the help of fictitious appearance